It's too soon to tell how serious President Trump is in defiance of the Constitution. In his first 28 days, he signed an order to nullify birthright citizenship for some, a right guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, and he has closed agencies and frozen spending that Congress mandated by law. Lower courts are holding up many of the president's priorities, but nothing has risen to the Supreme Court, where these battles over presidential power could rewrite history. Presidents often push limits, FDR's New Deal, for example, and voters in this last election wanted change. But the scope and speed of Trump's reach for power may be unprecedented. One example is a 63-year-old agency created by Congress, codified in law, and eviscerated by Trump in a matter of days.
The story will continue in a moment.
People are really scared. I think that, 12 days ago, people knew where their next paycheck was coming from. They knew how they were going to pay for their kids' daycare, their medical bills, and then all gone overnight.
All gone overnight for Christina Dry and Adam Dubard, fired this month in the chaotic shutdown of foreign aid distributed by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. More than 8,000 USAID employees were sent home by the administration.
They're not looking for competency. They're not looking for if you're good at your job. They're looking for pure loyalty tests. And if you don't give it, you will be punished.
And they had to leave the building. And these are folks who had decades and decades of public service serving USAID across administrations, from, George Bush to Obama to the first Trump administration. And they were never able to walk back in the building again.
There was no process? No one explained to them why they were being relieved?
To my knowledge, they received an email, and then if they didn't leave the building, they were escorted out of the building.
USAID was dismantled on Trump's order, even though it was mandated by Congress and its funding was required by law. The president says he has the authority to shut down an independent agency like USAID.
He most definitely does not.
Andrew Natsios is a former member of the Republican National Committee. He's a professor of government at Texas A&M University, and in the Bush White House, he was administrator of USAID.
He cannot rescind federal law by executive order, and AID is a statutory agency. The Foreign Assistance Act, I believe, is 300 or 400 pages long. You can't rescind that without an act of the Congress, and the Congress has not acted.
Acting on his own, the president started by destroying USAID's image. In online posts, the administration smeared USAID as, quote, a criminal organization, and called employees worms.
USAID, it's a disaster. What the people, radical left lunatics.
About USAID, President Trump has said, quote, billions of dollars have been stolen. The whole thing is a fraud.
It's utter nonsense. The most accountable aid agency in the world is USAID. I've written actually widely on this subject. 40% of the staff are accountants and lawyers and people trying to make sure no money is stolen. We've created systems to monitor that. What they did was they went back 20 years to try to find things. If you have to go back 20 years to find abuse, that means there isn't that much abuse.
USAID spending in 2023 was $38 billion. That's less than 1% of the federal budget. Natsios told us there is waste and occasional fraud like any big agency. Think of the Pentagon. But the money, he says, is watched by officials, including those in the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget.
The question is, why did the Congress approve all these contracts and grants and programs all these years? Why did OMB approve them? Why did the State Department, the F office controls all foreign aid spending. Every line item in the USAID budget is approved by 3 different bodies: the F office, OMB, and the Congressional Oversight Committees, of which there are 4. No one caught all these horrible abuses? That's just not believable.
Instead of asking Congress to change the law, Trump handed the budget axe to billionaire Elon Musk. Musk is racing through the government, cutting jobs and budgets with his own newly created organization he calls DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency.
The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that.
DOGE was authorized by Trump, and beginning in January, DOGE engineers rapidly gained wide access to the computer networks of the U.S. Treasury. A longtime Treasury official who tried to stop them was put on leave. Now, DOGE has accessed at least 19 other agencies.
You're principally reporting on what's happened to USAID. It's a dress rehearsal.
Chris Coons is a Democratic senator from Delaware, a member of the Committees on Appropriations and Foreign Relations.
Next up is the Department of Education. They're going to take it down next. They're already talking about getting into and going after the Department of Labor, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Defense, the Social Security Administration. Why?
Do you believe you have a sense of what DOGE is doing?
No, I think DOGE is an unelected, unofficial, small group of young tech bros who are charging into different federal agencies, getting into their core computer systems, doing things with them that at least I don't know the full details of, copying and downloading reams of data.
What does it matter that DOGE has access to U.S. government computer systems?
What matters is that the U.S. government has information about you, about me, our Social Security information, our Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefit payments, things that matter to us, obviously our tax filings. And if they have access to it and control it, they can change it.
DOGE demanded and received total control of USAID's unclassified computer network, including all financial and personnel files. One USAID employee told us that a DOGE engineer used the computer to give himself access to classified spaces in the building. That USAID employee told us they didn't know if the DOGE engineer entered those spaces, but the employee said that is the problem with all of this. We don't know what's been compromised.
What are they going to do with the information? Are they, we don't know who these people are. We don't know what controls have been placed on the information.
Randy Chester has worked for USAID 21 years under 4 presidents, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. He represents the agency workforce for the American Foreign Service Association. DOGE arrived at USAID January 27th, and that same day, USAID's top 58 managers were given 45 minutes to get out. The 58 senior managers, how would you describe them?
They're the best professionals I've had the privilege to work with or work under. Their integrity is without question. I think to a person, they believe in the mission of USAID and they believe in the ideals of public service.
USAID's signage was hastily covered in what employees saw as a gleeful put-down. But this past week, there was a partial reprieve. A judge temporarily restored funds to USAID's partners working overseas. Already, at least 67 lawsuits have been filed against the new administration. In the Oval Office with Musk, Trump said, quote, "I always abide by the courts." But he also said this.
We want to weed out the corruption, and it seems hard to believe that a judge could say, we don't want you to do that. Well, so maybe we have to look at the judges, because that's a very serious, I think it's a very serious violation.
We've seen flashpoints in these fights before. We've never seen this fight unfold across such a broad front and at such a basic level where a president is claiming so much of Congress's constitutional powers.
Stephen Vladeck is a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University Law Center.
Fraud doesn't negate statutes that Congress has enacted. Fraud just provides an excuse for revisiting them. And so the problem is that you see these claims of fraud by President Trump, by Elon Musk, that really feel like they're fig leaves.
If it's a fig leaf, what are they covering up?
I think what we're really seeing is a consolidation of power. And so fraud provides a plausible sounding reason for running over what had been historical constraints, whether they were statutes or norms, limiting the president's ability to centralize power. The end game here seems to be controlling every single apparatus of the federal government directly out of the White House. And that's just never been how we've understood executive power.
In your view, what would the founders think of where we are today?
I mean, the founders were a they, not an it. Even James Madison changed his mind about 17 times between when he wrote the Constitution and when he was president. So I think it's hard to generalize. I do think the founders would be very worried about just how much the tension that I think they thought they were creating among the branches has broken down. I mean, the idea is that we want a zealous executive. We want a zealous Congress. We want a zealous courts, because if they push at each other, that's how we'll find the limits. That's how we'll ensure that there's healthy checks and balances. But I think we can no longer dispute that Congress, which is supposed to be providing rigorous oversight of the executive branch, which is supposed to be reining in abuses by the executive branch, by the courts too, has largely stopped doing any of that.
Neither Elon Musk nor Doge responded to our request for an interview. It was Musk who called USAID employees worms. In a post, he gloated about feeding the agency into the wood chipper. The world's richest man had cut off assistance to the world's poorest families. Musk spent nearly $250 million to get Trump and other Republicans elected. He collects billions in taxpayer dollars for his SpaceX rockets.
I think we're creating a system that violates the separation of powers and the checks and balances that are intended in the Constitution.
Republican Andrew Natsios, former head of USAID, spoke to us in Washington in part because he is not hearing public appeals to reason from fellow Republicans.
I am not a moderate Republican. I am a conservative Republican and a strict constructionist. The reason they're not saying anything, I think they're afraid. Musk has said that he would spend $100 million in primaries on anybody who opposed the president on anything. So I think there's a lot of fear in the city right now.
How do you view this moment in history?
I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it does appear we may be headed towards some sort of a constitutional crisis. I hope that doesn't happen. I pray it doesn't happen, but it's certainly concerning to me what's going on in the city right now.
Is the constitutional order breaking down?
We'll see if they refuse to enforce a court order by the Supreme Court. If it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules against the administration on something and they refuse to enforce it, then we will have a constitutional crisis.
What happens then?
Well, I don't know.
No one knows.
No one knows.